that now that session will actually be starting. So before that happens, Steve, do you think that the court has been stretched? Because really, just looking at the timeline and you know, the decision by the CJ to actually listen to this matter and declare it as urgent.
I think the court is really stretched. And already we've seen the court extending the benefit of grace to the petition. It's very unusual for the court to accommodate this kind of application on a holiday. What lawyers are watching curiously, because you see now, we're not expecting the Supreme Court to sit and deliver a ruling.
Right.
We're expecting the court to sit and hear the arguments. So then, you know, this is a matter that the court ideally should deliver its ruling today so that we know if elections are proceeding tomorrow or not, because that is what matches the urgency with which the court has treated this issue. So maybe one can only pontificate and suggest that the court will hear the arguments now, then retire and then return later, let's say 5 p.m. to give
that is just, oh my goodness, the hours will be so thin.
You see now what the petitioners have in terms of the tactfulness, where there's a gap. When you file a matter such as this, of course you have a right to file it anytime you want, but when you file it too late, you run the risk that you may not be able to extract the kind of orders that you want, because you really stretch the court beyond what is humanly possible. And you see, this ruling will have to be documented, it will be reviewed. So the court must create a critical balance. Are you going to deliver a ruling for purposes of responding to the issues now, but the ruling which later on will vacate later, because people will be reviewing and analyzing this ruling. It must be grounded in law. I've had an occasion to peruse that petition.
Right.
For sure, that petition raises serious legal and constitutional questions that need determination if we are to go to election. And that petition should not be devalued or delegitimized. Actually, it has benefits for both sides. It has benefits for NASA, it has benefits for Jubilee, and the whole country. The immediate benefit for Jubilee, which wants this election to go on, if the Supreme Court is able to come back, let's say at 5 p.m. and says election should proceed, that's a huge leap forward on their, to their end.
Yeah.
If the court says, let's say also for NASA, that in our view, the environment is not, there's a climate of fear, the environment is not conducive to conduct an election, NASA will feel vindicated. But I think the win for the country is that at least now this matter is before the court, where we can expect a sober and dispassionate analysis. Remember, any attempt to devalue the place of our courts is what may now put the stability of the country at risk.
All right.
You know, politicians, they like to pander, they like to make arguments that promote the agenda. But the judiciary right now, and I think as we've said before, if we try to compare and contrast, contradistinguish the situation before 2010 and now, what works for us as a country is that now we have a shared understanding that if there is a misunderstanding, we can always rush to court, and the court can give us an objective analysis. That is what we are expecting today. But there's also another issue which I'm sure lawyers are also concerned about. Having come from the court yesterday, Chacha Mwita said he decried lack of jurisdiction. Now, there is no need to harmonize jurisprudence, or which is basically legal thought, no, judicial thought. Because this question, what the petitioner must not satisfy, is this a question of constitutional interpretation? Because if it's a question of interpretation, the Supreme Court will send them back to the High Court.
Wow.
You get? Yes, but if the Supreme Court views itself that this is a matter of presidential election and regards its role as that of defining, you know, the parameters for the conduct of presidential election, then the Supreme Court will entertain it.
All right.
So the issue of jurisdiction must first be canvassed and settled. If the court is of the view, and that is also a question of framing. All right. How the petitioners framed the application.
All right, Steve, one of the fundamental issues that this petition is raising is that the environment is not conducive. But then how do you qualify that in law?
Well, I think now that's a question of perception from one side, or maybe a second. Because IBC is enjoined, all eyes will be on the kind of response that IBC gives.
Okay.
Now, I can assure you, Betty, that response will affect the outcome of this election, either whether this petition succeeds or not. If IBC says that, yes, the environment is a lot of intrusion and manipulation by political actors, and you're unable to assure us, if Chebukati puts on record what he said in this press statement, then you can be sure that this petition will succeed, and the court will have no reason but to nullify, to postpone the election. Now, if IBC were to say that, in our view, we have challenges, but we are happy to progress with the election, which is what their conduct is telling us, because Chebukati has not come back to us to say that we are now unable to progress. If they say that we will progress, then the petition suffers a significant challenge, because you will have now one of the key players, Jubilee, saying election should proceed.
Yes.
You have the manager of the election saying election should proceed. And you have the other actor who is not in court. Officially, NASA is not in court. So the court is not allowed to comment on political statements. So the absence of NASA in this petition will have an impact already. So it's just a section of the civil society, a section of voters who are thinking the environment is not conducive. For sure, the environment for holding this election is in significant doubt. But what I see the court is saying, the court will have to create a critical balance whether the issues raised in this petition are the kind of questions that can be reserved and dealt with in an election petition, or whether it is necessary to determine them now.
And that brings me to my next question, because Justice Maraga said that, we want IBC to hold another repeat poll, and if it does not meet the threshold of the law, we'll still nullify that particular election. So for now, is it nullifying an election that has not happened if they decide to postpone this particular election?
Other than the issue of Raila Odinga's inclusion in this election, I see there are other issues that the petition raises, issues that could actually be canvassed in an election petition. And even if the court does not handle these issues now, they will resurface in an election petition, and the court will give them full consideration.
Right.
So I don't think it will be a total loss for the petitioners if they don't succeed, because these issues can then be raised. Remember, the court said already that, in their view, let justice be done, even if the heavens may fall. The fear of God, fidelity to the Constitution, and election laws is an irreducible minimum for the court. So with that, already, there are serious credibility doubts in the process, in the election management, that even if, let's say, we were to go to election, and Uhuru obviously emerges the winner, because without Raila participating, he has an almost unassailable lead. The challenge that he'll have to face is how to preserve that presidency, his win, because we seem to witness situations or scenarios that may as well meet what we say. The court will look at and say, this election does not meet the credibility requirements. That is the challenge. But insofar as the determination of the petition is concerned, the critical point, and if the court is able to isolate that, is the issue whether this election is still an election under Article 140 sub Article 3. Because the question that they have posed, which I really wish was posed much earlier, immediately Raila withdrew. When Raila was withdrawing from the election, the only law known to us, remember the laws that we have is the Constitution, statutes made by Parliament, and then judicial interpretations where there is no clarity. When Raila was withdrawing from the race, there was no clarity, and we didn't have complementary election laws. So what he relied on was paragraph 290, which says, of the 2013 Supreme Court judgment in the presidential election petition, that paragraph says that if there are only two candidates, as there were, Uhuru and Raila, and one withdraws, the election is cancelled and fresh nominations to ensue.
To be held.
Now, that observation, of course, has been displaced by Mativo judgment in the Kuru case. But the critical point, the nuances around it is this. At the time Raila was withdrawing, the incontestable fact, Betty, is that the judgment in the Kuru decision was not delivered. So the only legal atmosphere, environment, was that Supreme Court judgment. What was the consequence of Raila's withdrawal? That's the first question. And was it immediate? So that if the consequence was to nullify the election, then you ask yourself, was it immediate? If the answer was yes, it was immediate, then you can tell us, you can know that by the time Justice Mativo was giving the judgment in the Kuru decision, that judgment could not settle. But if the court is of the view that the consequence was that the election stood cancelled, but it was not immediate, it was open to IBC to again review it, the way IBC did, and IBC chose to review it in the context of a Kuru judgment, then the election may be saved. So those are some of the legal nuances around what is going to happen in court today.
Do you think that Wafula Chebukati, to some extent, let this country down by actually coming so late in the day to be enjoined in this particular case?
Betty, in fact, I am terribly embarrassed by the conduct of the commission insofar as management of candidates and management of the electoral process is concerned. We have seen legal goofs, blunders that ordinarily a commission such as what we have now should not be making. And these are things, I think, after this election is over, I see a possibility of someone raising a constitutional petition to challenge the suitability of these commissioners to continue serving in those, in that office. Because the kind of blunders they've made, if the commissioner, the IBC chairman, comes out publicly and says, I am not able to assure the country of a credible election, he should follow that with some urgent remedial actions, communicating up to speed how he's trying to reconstruct the space and make sure that he preserves that space for himself and the commission to be able to deliver that credible election. If he believes that he's not able to do so, he should have been the person in court telling the court, not waiting for citizens and voters to go to court. Then he's going to latch onto that case. I think if Chebukati were to swear an affidavit agreeing or supporting the position by the petitioners,
yes,
that itself, other than now cancelling the election, that itself would make Chebukati as his position as chair no longer tenable in that commission.
Right. Wow, thank you very much, Steve Ogolla. He is a lawyer. As you can see, there's quite a number of activities that's happening in the Supreme Court. Any moment from 10 a.m., that's the time that we understand. Actually, it's already like 10 a.m., so we're waiting that any moment now we'll be having the Supreme Court judges sit. Let's now take a look at the pictures. So we have what's happening inside, outside the precincts of the Supreme Court. Patrick Omimo mentioned to us earlier that there's police presence in the area surrounding the Supreme Court, that really it has been barricaded off like it has any activity around the Supreme Court. But as you can see there, quite a number of lawyers already seated waiting for the arrival of the Supreme Court judges, and then any moment now we'll be getting to hear what direction the Supreme Court is going to be giving this country with regard to this latest petition by the 3 voters. All right, so that's the latest.